So here we have the pillbox Flutus cassette. It was approximately on orbit for 40 days. There are 20 unique samples tested on ISS. We'll take a look at what we got.
So one of the main reasons we would like to do experiments like this in space, especially for the pharma industry, is in microgravity, you might get a larger crystal, you might get a more pure crystal, you might get a more pure form.
I do see crystals. It's excellent. Wow, that's too cool. Good to go.
And you could receive that material back to Earth and potentially use it as seed to make that unique form down here on Earth.
This is the second experiment that Eli Lilly has worked on with Redwire, and this is the second time that they've flown within the last 4 months. So I think that's one of the things that Redwire is striving to do, is to be able to work with commercial industry and have opportunities for them to do research in space on a more frequent basis. And so with a lot of our commercial partners, we're able to do that. And so that's really exciting. Look forward to that. So, you know, some of the crystals, what are some of the things you're looking for in this experiment with some of the crystals?
Yeah, I think this is really to help us understand the basic mechanisms of protein crystallization and how can we do that better. And of course, it will have broad implications because it can help scientists inside Lilly and outside the Lilly as well to unlock the secrets of protein targets and help us as a community design better medicines.
Great, great. No, we're very excited about this, and you know, just the tremendous potential. And I think that's what's so exciting, is how can we help people here on Earth? I think that's what's so unique about the environment of space. Provides many great opportunities to be able to do that, and I think that's what everybody dreams about, going to space. Winston, I know you've been in space. You've lived there for a short period of time, and you know, tell us a little bit about some of the medical situations and just the environment you were in, and how you see things like this helping people live and work in space.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm glad to be here also. Just a general overview, my two missions were just prior to building the International Space Station, so they were engineering in nature. We were testing tools, equipment, techniques that astronauts would later use to actually assemble the space station. I had two jobs on the shuttle. I'm a pilot by background, a naval aviator, so I was flight engineer on the shuttle for the flying parts of the mission. But I was a spacewalker, so I did 3 spacewalks or EVAs during the mission. Now, we were not specifically focused on medical, but every mission has medical implications. And you just heard a little bit of talk about crystals. We had an experiment on board my second flight called isothermal dendritic growth experiment. And in that experiment, we grew crystals, but the purpose of growing those crystals was to validate a mathematical model that the principal investigator wanted to validate. In other words, when you start designing things, you can't do it by trial and error. So what you try and do is develop a mathematical model. Then you can manipulate that model as the first step to designing whatever you're going to design. So in this case, it's crystals. So we had this crystal growth experiment in space that we ran and recorded so that the principal investigator could determine how accurate his mathematical model is. So again, that has direct implications to pharmaceuticals, to medical, and so on. Some other things that are very, very important about space and medical is radiation. You know, when we're in space, especially outside of a spacewalk, we're concerned about radiation. And radiation really becomes important when we leave the Earth and we go off to the moon, we go off to Mars, which is going to be a 2-year or 3-year proposition. We've got to figure out how to insulate ourselves against that radiation. So while I'm out on my spacewalk, I have dosimeters inside of my suit measuring how much radiation my body is absorbing, so that researchers on the ground can correlate that with my physical health over the years and hopefully develop ways to mitigate the detrimental radiation effect in space. One other thing I'll mention, I'll stop and let my other colleagues talk over here. Medical implications, medical advancements from the space program not only come from up there, but they happen with the space program from down here. I remember a few years ago, before we retired the space shuttle, the technicians developed a new X-ray technique to x-ray the external fuel tank to determine if there are any faults on it. Well, that x-ray technique was later adapted to x-ray women to detect breast cancer. So here's another example of where space technology can be adapted to help us to better perform medical examinations and medical advancements. So thanks again, and I'm looking forward to
No, that's so cool. You know, and I think we don't realize the unique environment that space offers. You know, a lot of people don't understand, you know, you can't simulate weightlessness here on the ground. There's no chamber, there's no device, there's no nothing that you can say, oh, I'm gonna live in this for a couple of days, I'm gonna put this experiment in there and simulate microgravity. The only place you can go to get that environment, that true environment, is space. And so that's what's so cool. So Winston, one more follow-up question. You know, you've been in space, and you know, we talk about these experiments, we talk about all these great discoveries. What are some of the challenges, you know, to do some of these kind of experiments in space? Because I know it's a unique environment, and for the little kids here, you know, just turning a knob, you know, explain how some of those things are different in space than they are here on the ground.
Everything is different in space than is on the ground. It's because of the continuous weightlessness, as you just heard. If you're going to, for example, something simple. At home, if you want to run an extension cord across the room, you just plug in one outlet, you peg it out over the floor, and you plug it into the device on the other side of the room. Well, that becomes a whole nother challenge in space. And when we were testing space station techniques, one of the things that I did was actually test various connectors and cables. I had a cable box on one of my spacewalks, and I had a whole series of cables in there. The smallest cable was probably about a ½ inch in diameter. The largest was like a fire hose, and then each one had a different connector on the end. Now in space, the temperature changes hundreds of degrees as you go around the Earth. Cabling can expand, it can contract, it can off-gas. You want to shield it and stabilize the temperature as much as possible. The cable can get so stiff that you can't even move it. So engineers have to design in such a way that you can handle it. So my point is, something that's very easy on Earth, running an extension cord, becomes a whole nother level of difficulty in space. And thus we have to design the materials, the shielding and so on, and then test them out to be sure that they will work well in space.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, and I think people don't understand, you know, if there's, you know, that's one of the things that Redwire specializes in, is developing the research equipment to be able to do these type of experiments in space. And I think what people don't understand is the challenges. You know, if something catches on fire, you can't just open up the window and let out the smoke. You know, when you turn a knob, you know, unless your feet are strapped down, you know, you move with that knob. You know, and so it's very challenging, and things you take for granted here on Earth are 10 times more challenging in space, I'm sure.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, good. So Mark, tell us a little bit about, you know, the Artemis program and Gateway. I think, you know, you're working on, you know, the future exploration, some of the future opportunities. You know, we're excited about being able to go back to the moon and eventually go to Mars. Tell us a little bit about Gateway and some of the things that you're working on.
So I'm compelled to start it after listening to GE and Winston and think about, I've got a 11-year-old daughter who just did a 5th grade science experiment and wanted to grow crystals. As a parent and an aerospace engineer, not a chemist, it's really hard to grow crystals in my kitchen. And her science experiment was tough, and what she learned at the end was the environment. The humidity in Florida, all these things change. So space station, right, where this experiment is going and where GE's getting to take advantage of a different environment, 300 miles or so above us. So think about a road trip you might take from one major city in the continental US to another. That's the platform we've had up just above us for 20 plus years. That's a science platform to do this stuff. And Winston was there when we had a mobile platform in the space shuttle that we kept bringing back. What we're trying to do with Artemis is put out a small lunar space station in cislunar orbit, so that 300-mile jaunt now becomes a 250,000-mile jaunt to get out to the moon. And we've got that space station out there, much smaller than we have today in the International Space Station. International Space Station is probably a 5 or 6 bedroom house, volume equivalent. Gateway will be more like a studio apartment. But it's the cislunar springboard for us to enable a new industry out at the moon, for us to aggregate our Orion spacecraft that'll bring our crew out, to aggregate our human lander that'll help crew get to the surface, and to aggregate logistics that I get to bring up with my team that emulates what GE is getting to do today in low Earth orbit space station. So with Artemis, we're trying to move the needle even further out to the moon. There's resources out at the moon. We see water ice there. If we can mine that, we can start to create a gas station, for lack of better terms, and a way to not have to bring everything from Earth to enable us to explore further in the galaxy. So that's what we're doing with Gateway.
That's so exciting. And Redwire is involved with technologies where we are working on how can you make tools and instruments in space. You know, our philosophy is, you know, we've heard the term, make it, don't take it. And so I think, you know, can you imagine the complexity? You know, we talk about how challenging it is to do an experiment on the shuttles and now on the International Space Station. But imagine, you know, on the moon, and imagine on the way to Mars. It's very difficult to come back home and say, hey, let's go back to the garage and get that extra wrench that we forgot. So Redwire is involved in a lot of those kind of technologies and enabling the research to be done. So Mark, let's talk a little bit about some of the medical needs of the, you know, as you go to deeper space, and talk about kind of how that looks like. Because as I said, you know, you're not going to be able to just say, hey, I forgot something, let's turn around and go back home and pick it up.
Yeah, so we have to be very autonomous. So people in the room can think about if you get a chance to go camping or you go to a very remote spot here in our country, you've got to bring things with you, maybe bring the medicines that your family needs, think about the contingencies that may happen. Right now when we go to space station, it's a couple-day trip. We can get our astronauts back to Earth in hours if there's an emergency. When we go out to the moon, it's going to take us maybe a week to get out there. When we go down to the surface, we're adding more time of getting them home. So Gateway becomes a safe haven. And it's important for us to find ways to be autonomous, to not have to bring everything we need, but maybe have new technologies where, you know, the pharmacy is there and the building blocks are there to do what we need, or think about the medical procedures that may have to happen. Winston probably can talk about the training that goes into that just from the shuttle missions. It starts to become even more extensive when it's a 30-day mission that we may be gone and we're 250,000 miles away from home.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so important. And I think just having an appreciation of the volume that you have when you're talking about doing those missions, there's very little space. And so everything has to be miniaturized, and that comes along with design challenges, and I think that's, you know, also, you know, very complicated, gets very complex. So, GE, you know, talk a little bit about some of the maybe futuristic, you know, in an ideal situation, you know, some of the things that maybe you think like Eli Lilly could do.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, you know, the listening to, you know, Mark and Winston talking about all the challenges associated with doing experiments in the space. So what is the benefit for us to do that in the kind of drug discovery space? Like, why do we bother to try to take all these difficulties to try to grow protein crystals in space? So that's because there is a critical need. Many of the proteins that we are interested in for discovering new kind of medicine purposes are not readily crystallizable on Earth. So we have many challenges there. It's not a simple process. We routinely screen thousands of conditions just to try to find one condition that works, that generates protein crystal. And even with that effort, we couldn't do that for every protein that is important for disease treatment purposes. So we want to explore a bit more and opening new avenues for us to understand proteins better, and especially those proteins that are related to human disease. So you might ask, you know, why crystallization is such a difficult process? I can do that with my little box, you know, growing crystals. I'm sure many of us have done that. So I had that growing crystals in the kitchen experience in my teenage years. So very fun experience. But thinking about that is inorganic. Usually that's with inorganic molecules. Now proteins are complex. They are big molecules. They are kind of squishy, flexible. And what does a crystal look like? To form a crystal, you have to have about 100 trillion copies of that protein lined up perfectly in the space. So same distance from each other in a grid format. And not only that, precision of the position is important, but also orientation is important as well. You have to be able to orient those proteins in the same orientation so that you can form a perfect crystal that can enable us to see what the protein looks like. in atomic resolution. That's important for us to design molecules accordingly. So with that challenge, how does the space can help with the microgravity environment? They really think about the gravity. Gravity is the enemy when we try to grow crystals in all dimensions. You imagine you have a seed. You want to encourage all copies, proteins line up perfectly in every direction. But gravity is pulling everything down into one direction. So that's challenging. And also thinking about convection, where we all know when liquid gets warmer, it gets less dense, so it goes up. And cooler liquids gets more dense, goes down. So that creates movement in the liquid. And proteins form crystals in a liquid environment. And that disturbance is going to create challenges for forming the perfect crystal. So this is the reason we want to study how this microgravity environment can really help us to find new ways of growing crystals for those proteins that are difficult to deliver on Earth.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think as we encounter new diseases and new medical challenges, I think we've got to be more innovative. I think space is a great opportunity to look to new innovation. And so Redwire really looks forward to working with Eli Lilly, and we're very thankful and excited to see how these experiments carry out. Winston, why don't you tell the little ones here, how does it feel to float around in space and not have that gravity element? Because I'm sure that everybody is like, I'd love to know how that feels.
I get that question all the time, and there are no words I can say to make you feel it, to make you know how it feels. I can try and describe it. You've seen it on TV, but I can't make you feel it. I will say this, floating around in space is fun in a way because you do the things you see on TV. You fly across the room like Superman or Supergirl or whatever. You can turn flips and somersaults and all that stuff. You can play with your food in space. When you get to be an astronaut, you can play with your food. When you go home tonight and mom says, don't play with your food, don't play with your food. Only when you get to be an astronaut. Man, weightlessness is fun in a way, but it's also uncomfortable. Your body has to get used to it, and there are a number of things that happen that makes it a little bit uncomfortable until you get used to it, and then your body feels normal. But a problem with living in zero gravity, of course, is that the body begins to deteriorate. A lot of things happen to the body that are not good for it. And one of the important things that Redwire is doing, that Lilly is doing, other researchers are doing, is trying to figure out ways that people can live in space and not have that environment negatively impact our body. Because if we're going to go off and live in space long term, we have to be able to overcome those.
No, absolutely. That's a great point. And I think, Mark, with a lot of those challenges, what do you see as we want to talk about going to the moon and Mars and with Gateway? What do you see as one of the biggest challenges we got to try to overcome to get there?
I've always thought the biggest challenge for us with exploring is communication, is really making sure we're explaining to the public the benefits of this. When you look at what's happening today, Eli Lilly, a commercial company that does things that benefits us here every day that we sometimes take for granted, to make things that benefit all of us takes research and development dollars. A company will invest research and development dollars when they see a business case, and then they can continue to make money. That's our commercial capitalist environment. Going to space and finding a way to get to this new environment takes the government putting an investment in creating a new infrastructure and a new platform. No different than when we lay down railroad tracks or we put a new airport in a new city and we allow expansion of our population to new areas across the country. That's what NASA's investment going to the moon is doing. And we're trying to do it in a way that enables commercial companies to come behind us, which is what's happening today in low Earth orbit. And it's extremely exciting to see how we went from the 80s, the government launching shuttle for us to inspire a generation, and now commercial industry is starting to see a business case in low Earth orbit. And we might start to see a sustainable industry there where NASA can move out of the way and push on to the moon and try to pull commercial industry with us there as well.
Oh, absolutely. And it's so exciting, such a new, I like to say it's not the rebirth of the golden years. I say it is the golden years that we're working in right now, and the opportunity to be able to explore and to push the boundaries and be able to go to Mars and Moon is just super exciting. And thank you guys for all your great work. And I know NASA's excited about opening up those doors to deep exploration. So with that, I think we're going to go ahead and take a couple questions. All right, we got a volunteer in the back.
This is for Mr. Scott. Thank you for your service, and also thank you for taking my question. I'm like honored to be able to speak to this. What can you tell the rest of us that are here, your experience in space, how it affected you spiritually, philosophically, emotionally? Anything that you could tell us would be like a drop to those of us that will never experience it.
Oh, well, first of all, I would not say you'll never experience it, because we're in times right now where I believe everybody in this room will have the opportunity to go to space. You know, like you just heard, the private commercial companies are stepping up. They're making access, making it more accessible, more affordable, so everybody in here will get to go, or could go in one way or another. If not as a professional astronaut, certainly as a tourist. But I get the question a lot about flying in space. I don't think you can see the Earth from that perspective and not have it affect you in one way or another, because it is a totally different perspective. When you are on Earth or in an airplane, no matter how high you are, you can only see to the horizon. But when you're in space, you can see the Earth beneath you, you see the atmosphere, the thick part of the atmosphere, and then you see past the horizon. You see all that other stuff out there, and you realize how small and how fragile and insignificant the Earth is. It's significant to us because it's home, but in the total scheme of things, Earth is very, very insignificant. So we better do a better job of taking care of it because it is our home. You also notice how bright and colorful the Earth is. It is incredibly beautiful. I like to use the desert as an example. If you see the desert on TV, people are trapped in the desert with no water, just brown sand. But if you look at the Sahara, for example, from space, it's very colorful, like a red, like a orange, like a black. So the Earth is incredibly beautiful. But the main thing is the Earth is peaceful from space. When I turn on the news in the morning, I just about have a heart attack. When I turn on the news in the afternoon, I just about have a heart attack. But when you see Earth from space, it is so peaceful. You don't see any strife. You don't see any fighting or arguing of one group of people against another group of people. It's just all one Earth, one home, one group of people. So it is a totally different perspective, and you hope that somewhere along the line, leaders of the various countries will begin to see us as one family, one group of people living in one home, and we begin to work better together.
God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, yeah, I'm sure that creates a lot of self-reflection when you're up there in such a beautiful environment. Yeah, that's great. All right, we got a little one up here in front.
Can you eat in space and not in your rocket ship?
The question, can you eat in space and not in a rocket ship? Well, you eat in the rocket ship and in space. I mean, when the rocket ship is in space, we did eat our meals there. And now on the International Space Station, people eat their meals there too. And we eat some of the same things up there that you eat down here, but the food is prepared just a little bit differently.
Well, I think some of the things that are cool that I've heard stories is, like, you know, if you put water in your cup, it's not necessarily going to stay there. You know, you can't just pour milk in your cereal and expect it just to all go into the bowl. So I'm sure it creates challenges.
Absolutely, floats all over the place.
Yeah. All right, any other questions? Go ahead.
I wanted to ask Gia something.
Can you speak up a little bit? We're having a hard time hearing you.
I wanted to ask Gia if the protein research and the crystals can help go towards prion diseases. Research on prion diseases.
He was asking about the protein research.
Can the proteins that you're researching in space help with treating prion diseases?
I think this is application of this protein crystallization research is not disease specific. We can apply that technique and the understanding of the crystallization process to treat many diseases. So in general, thinking about the medicines on the market that has been already invented and approved, many of those medicines are designed based on structural knowledge, the information about the protein structures. So that was one component that went into the discovery of those medicines. So I'm sure for the as we move along and have advance our understandings of more disease-related proteins, we can treat even more diseases.
All right, there's a question over there in the back.
Are there any laws in space, is it like a government?
Are there any laws in space or government?
Well, that's a good question. I think, right now the International Space Station is international, so there's all the different countries that are actually part of that. And I think part of this Accords, which is part of what we're trying to do with Gateway and some of the new opportunities to go deeper into space, we're looking at how can we all join together and be a part of that opportunity.
Hi, my name is Jessie, and I'm here with these 4 little scientists here. Kind of a question for them. They go to Pinecrest down in Vera, big STEM school down there, and they are participating in something called Radish Sphere right now. They planted seeds that were flown up in August of 22 on the Minerva 4 space balloon, and they're comparing them to a control group of bell radish seeds that were not, bell cherry radishes that were not flown up to space. And so their purpose is to see the difference in growth, and we talked about growing crystals and how they compare to on Earth. Is there, I don't know, can you weigh in? Maybe what kind of growth differences can they see between one group or the other?
I don't know, Winston, you want to take that one?
I'll talk a little bit about it. We grew plants in space on one of my flights, my second flight, I guess it was, and we grew a plant called Brassica rapa. It's kind of a mustard plant. We took that one because it grows very quickly. We all lived there for 2 weeks. So we planted the seeds, and it grew. We harvested the plants and put them in the freezer and brought them back home, all within 2 weeks. At the same time, the same plant was being grown on Earth. And the idea, as these young scientists are doing, is for the researchers to compare the 2 plants. Now, what we could only observe with our eyes what was happening on the shuttle. For example, we can see how fast the plant grew, And the interesting thing about plants is that they grow towards the light source. We don't think about it on Earth, but plants do come out of the ground and grow up because that's where the sun is. The roots grow towards the food source on the Earth. The roots grow down because the food source is down. But in space, you can put the light source wherever you want it. You can put the food source wherever you want it, and thereby tailor the plant growth chamber as you want it. Also, different plants respond differently to different frequencies of light. The sun is white and gives us a total frequency, but in space, if you can narrow the frequency for a particular plant, you can nourish that plant and not disturb you and your crewmates. What we could not see was the glucose, the sugar, the sucrose, and things like that. The researchers on the ground would do that. And the idea, obviously, of growing plants in space is that, first and foremost, we can develop better plants down here, better farming techniques. But another thing is that if we're going to live in space long term, we need to know how to grow our food up there so that we can have nice, fresh food in space.
Yeah, thank you, great. And I know just simple things like watering plants becomes more challenging in space because, here again, the water doesn't just fall to the floor or fall to the ground. So it does create engineering challenges that I know, Redwire is involved in some plant research. We're developing a lot of greenhouse type of technology to do, research of plants in space. I think we got time maybe for one more question.
We got one right here.
All right, great.
Maybe this is too early of a question for Eli Lilly, but is there any plans to manufacture some of these medications or something like that if it is more efficient? Like you mentioned about the crystals growing more efficiently over there in space without the gravity. So is there any plan to create a lab just like the ISS? Something like a floating lab or something like that where you can manufacture some of these life-saving medications more efficiently there in space?
I think it's really thinking about scientifically, thinking about what benefits we can gain by doing experiments or even manufacturing in space. We need to first understand all the elements that goes into that process. And this kind of investigation, this launch, is the first step, helping us to appreciate what space has to offer. and in terms of future opportunities. So certainly we are interested in seeing what outcome we can learn from this experiment, and then make our decisions.
I'll add to it too that NASA's trying hard to incubate. When space station was designed for a 30-year life. We're looking at 2030 maybe being towards the end of the life of the space station. As we're moving another station out into Gateway and trying to do this out at the moon, we're also trying to incubate ways and get the government to invest in ways to help have multiple commercial platforms in space so that commercial companies can get together, find a way to create their own platform in low Earth orbit. And with the supply chain that we've been able to create with CRS missions like today, commercial resupply missions like today, we'll have that constant transportation up and down. There's even research going on, I believe it's University of Florida is doing research on 3D printing human organs. So make a more perfect human kidney artificially in that zero gravity environment and bring that back down to Earth to help folks that have things like polycystic kidney disease, which is a tremendous thing just up there with heart disease.
I'm glad you mentioned that because Redwire actually has a bioprinter. Redwire is the one involved with that, and we actually have Yeah, there you go. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We actually have a bioprinter up on the International Space Station right now. And what's so cool about space with bioprinting is, here on the ground you can print in the X and the Y, but you can't print in the Z because gravity here on Earth causes that tissue to fall to the bottom of the platform. To think about printing human tissue in space, it's basically a bio-ink. It's like a gelatin type of solution. And as you print that in space, not only can you print in the X and the Y, but you can also print the Z. So you can actually develop that structure more purely in the space environment. So it's really cool. All the different things you can do with space and without gravity. So, okay. Well, let's give this distinguished. We got one more question. Okay, if we got time, let's go for it.
How do you drink in space without no gravity?
All right, Winston, that one's yours.
Dude, do you know what a Capri Sun is? You know what a Capri Sun is, don't you? Don't you? Yes, you do. Of course you do. How many of you know what a Capri Sun is? That's how we drink stuff in space because all of our drinks are in drink bags. That's right. So you put a straw in the bag and then you sip your drink, but you have to close the straw with a clip because if you don't close it, the rest of the liquid will float out and float all over the room. So we have orange drinks, grapefruit, pineapple, coffee, tea, milk. It's all in drink bags, just like a Capri Sun. Oh, we have to have it. You take the water with you. And then you can replenish it and remanufacture, but you have to have water up there, obviously, because we need water to live. So we have to have food and water in space.
Now, Winston, how often did you guys forget to close those off?
Yeah, but what really happens, I'll try to be brief about this, is when you come home. When you're in space, say you're working on your computer, you sip your coffee or whatever, close straw, you float it up there in front of you, work a little bit. You reach up, you sip, then you float. Guess what? When you're working at home and you sip, it doesn't work very well. Your coffee doesn't float.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, let's give this distinguished panel a big round of applause. This was probably one of the most fun panels we have ever had in here. I want to thank you guys so much because it was an excellent afternoon with you. Well, thank you so much. Redwire just wants to thank everybody for participating. Thank all of you for coming and participating. It was a great day and a great panel. And we're looking forward to a successful launch this afternoon. So hopefully, that's fingers crossed, everything will go smoothly and we'll have the pillbox up in space here in no time. So thanks again and have a great day.